Hey everyone, so UFC 284 just wrapped up last night, and man, pretty entertaining fight card to be honest, right? You had Yair win the interim belt from Josh Emmett. How fucking good did Jack Della Madellena look, right? We'll talk about all that a little bit more, but obviously, the big highlight from the night is weirdly going to be, Makhachev beats Volkanovski, right? He wins. He wins a unanimous decision. But the talk is going to be about how well Volkanovski did against Islam and how he was able to, kind of, I don't know, he kind of poked some holes in the style a little bit of Islam Makhachev. He's starting to prod at it, right? And I remember thinking to myself after it concluded, and I have to go back and watch the fight again, guys. I've only watched it the first time. I remember thinking that you could very well give rounds 2, 3, and 5 definitely to Volkanovski, right? Here's the other thing, though. I've seen some criticism because one of the judges, I think, scored 1, 2, 3, and 4 for Makhachev, right? He scored all of those rounds for him. And I got to be honest, man. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. Like, don't get me wrong. It's like I don't think it's right. Personally, I thought that Volkanovski won the third round more solidly than the second. I think the second's a little more up for debate. But, like, man, fuck, I could see how you would give every single round to Makhachev except for the fifth. I really do. I mean, like, if you look at what he was doing, right? The thing is, too, every time he landed on Volkanovski kept acknowledging it, and that doesn't look good to the judges, and I do think it was stinging Volkanovski. I think it hurt him, and it would drop him a couple times, knock him off balance. Like, Islam has real power in his hands, and I think that's where the size discrepancy kind of came into place most significantly. And you guys could see at some points that, like, Volkanovski, when he's fighting guys like Holloway, right, who don't quite have that kind of pop on their power, and you saw this when Poirier, or when Holloway moved up to fight Poirier too, that Poirier had more sting on his punches because he's the bigger guy, man. Like, Islam definitely had more pop on his punches, and that was, impacting. That was impacting Volk a lot, I think. It's hard, man. It's hard to overcome that difference. That's a tall task, and you got to see that, like, sometimes there were moments where Islam was able to just march Volkanovski straight down, right? And kind of negate a lot of the footwork and stuff that we'd otherwise see from Volkanovski. Like, if you look at what they were doing Volkanovski did a great job for the most part in the fight of controlling the outside foot positioning, but I really don't think he was prepared for the counters. Every time he would go in, I was thinking, man, he's leaving his head hanging up there after he finishes throwing that leg kick in particular. And just after his combos in general, he was sitting in the pocket and he wasn't getting back out fast enough and he wasn't bringing his hands back to his face. So he wasn't covering up after throwing his combos. And I don't know if that's partly because it's so much work to cover distance on a bigger guy, but Islam would catch him with some of those counters, man, and they hurt Volkanovski. And he would, not even counters. I mean, sometimes Islam would go first and just peg Volk right in the face with shit. You know what I mean? So it was like, that kept happening throughout the fight, and it felt like to me that this is just my view on the kind of theme or like overarching story of that fight is that it felt like until the last round really solidly, Volk was trying to like find a way to overcome the aggressiveness of Islam. Like, if you look at who was on the offensive for the most part throughout most of the fight, I think it's Islam. Like, I can see how you give 2 and 3 to Volkanovski, but it just felt like Islam was controlling and winning the fight, and Volkanovski was kind of playing catch-up a little bit. Like, he was just a step behind. That's how I felt watching it, right? And then the tides turned in the fifth, for sure. He hurt him with that right hand. He forced Islam to turtle. He beat the hand, got around, and started, like, he got it in top position there. And it's a good fight. It was a fucking great fight. And it's what you get, like, when you combine the two best pound-for-pound fighters that you have in the world. And this is what's great when you consider what the UFC does. They do put on the fights that you want to see. And you can say whatever you want about the promotion and the lack thereof, rather. But at the end of the day, you still got the fight. And the people who really care about the fight like this are UFC fans, you know what I mean? Like, the general public is going to care more about Conor and Chandler than they're going to care about this. But if you're a fan of the sport, last night was a really big deal. Last night was a really big deal because, like I said, you got to see Volkanovski show you that it's possible to deal with this style that Khabib and Islam have brought to the UFC and kind of like giving people real problems with. I mean, what? Khabib never lost a round except to Conor, right, in the third? It's like, holy fuck, they got something going on here, and Volkanovski's starting to show at the highest level ways that you can deal with it. And I'm also going to get a breakdown out. It's going to be really, like, we'll look at some of the things that Islam did successfully too. And this is another thing before we get started, right? Before I go on about, like, the breakdown. Like, you have to be careful not to give too much credit to Volkanovski and not give any to Islam. Like, the whole narrative kind of becomes about, wow, man, Volkanovski did a great job. Like, he did so much better than everybody expected, and he showed you that it's possible. But, man, Islam put Volkanovski in some compromising situations. He definitely hurt him on the feet. He took his back. He wasn't able to finish him, granted, but he did take his back, and he was able to control him from there. And once he got there, Volkanovski really didn't have a path out, you know? He had good submission defense. I think he was going to be able to stay safe there for a very long time. And the back is an interesting position, right? Because if you look at what happened in the fourth round, say what you want. I don't care if you're an Islam fan, whatever. What happened in the fourth round is an odd version of stalling. Like, it really is. When you're on somebody's back like that and you're continuously holding the body triangle on one side, and it's hard to prove. You can't take the position away because it's so dominant. I mean, if it's sport jiu-jitsu, it's 4 points, right? That amount are the most dominant positions in sport jiu-jitsu. And it is the probably number one spot that you want to be in terms of finishing somebody, right? Maybe in the UFC mount, arguably. I don't know. I don't know how the statistics break down. But my point is just, like, it is stalling. He wasn't really doing anything. It becomes obvious after a certain point that Volkanovski's not in submission danger, right? It never felt like Islam was really close to choking him. Maybe a couple times when he was on the gym, but you could tell that Volkanovski was not sweating it there. He felt comfortable there, right? He was in a bad position nonetheless. I'm not saying that. But nothing was really happening. You're just in this position, but you can't take it away from him because it's so dominant. So, you know, I don't know. There's this weird argument about whether you should force the fighter to start transitioning and working harder for submissions, right? But at the same time, they shouldn't have to sacrifice such a dominant position where they have the opportunity, right? Because when you take that away, you take away extreme finishing opportunities. So it's a really complex debate, but it feels like stalling, right? And you just got the sense that Volkanovski was going to be able to stay safe there. But how the fuck do you take the back from somebody? You can't. At the end of the day, if I'm being honest, like, I need to, like, backtrack on what I said about, like, potentially standing up. At the end of the day, it is on Volkanovski to get out and get to his feet. It is not Islam's fault that this guy can't escape it. And you would want, even if it takes forever, like, or however long it takes, if this was a death match, it's on Volkanovski to get out of that compromising position, and Islam can just hold him there until he tires out and until he eventually does find a way to get what he wants and beat him down and get the choke. He's still in dominant position. So, yeah, Volkanovski's got to get out. But I still think you can't take the position away, but it is a weird form of stalling that happens sometimes from the back. It's odd to see it because it's such a good position for finishing, and so many finishes do happen from there, but it can turn into a position where I think you can stall, right? But anyway, moving on. So in terms of the breakdown and stuff, I'm definitely going to get a breakdown out. I want to talk about some of the things that Volkanovski did correct. One of the things that he always did, guys, is, like, every time Makhachev would get his hands locked around the waist, Volkanovski would rotate his hips up, right? He wouldn't go with the takedown. He wouldn't just accept it. He would turn his hips. And what this would do in turn is, because Makhachev's hands are connected, it would turn Makhachev's hips over. And then that would give Volkanovski an opportunity to get an inside hook or inside foot positioning, circle his hips out, and get back to his feet using that overhook or that whizzer, right? And he can get his head on top because it's impossible for me to, like, sit here and explain. But his takedown defense, he was very well prepared for the takedowns of Makhachev, and that was super impressive. And, you know, in that fifth round, he had double underhooks. He was trying to take Makhachev down. I mean, granted, Makhachev's takedown defense stood up brilliantly. But he was giving them like there were moments in the clinch where like Volkanovski was able to control things up against the cage. There were interesting moments in this fight where Volkanovski really did look good and where you got to see some gaps. And there was this moment where I was watching the fight last night with my wife, and I was saying like, man, it's like Volkanovski, when he started going into those clinch situations and engaging in those and being the one to initiate those sometimes, like I'm talking when he's pushing Makhachev up against the cage, you watch that and you go, okay, he's hit a point in this fight where he feels comfortable grappling and exchanging like this with Makhachev. He doesn't feel like he's in danger. And it's incredible what that'll do for your confidence because it starts to open other things up, right? Once you feel good about that and that you can engage in those situations with him and handle yourself, it makes you more willing to open up and do other things and get the striking going and stuff, right? So I think those were some big moments for Makhachev to kind of control things in the clinch up along the cage. And yeah, like I said, we'll take a deeper look at some of his like detailed takedown defense because I thought it was brilliant. But yeah, very well prepared, very good fight. But I do think that Makhachev won. Now, what's next for each of these guys, right? First off, the pound for pound spot has to flip. I know it was a close fight and Makhachev is heavier, right? But he has to take the number one spot and Volk has to fall to number two. But again, with the UFC, you get fights like this, and say what you want about Dana White and the terrible things that he does, but it is true that historically, throughout his tenure, you get the fights. And this was a great fight. I mean, a fucking like true matchup, and you got to see this last night was like high level, the highest level martial arts you're gonna see. Maybe that we've seen on display. Is there any argument for ever? Like, is that the most skill that we've ever seen in the octagon in terms of well-roundedness from each fighter ever? Right, in terms of Makhachev is a true specialist and Volkanovski, very talented. But man, Makhachev's just fundamentally sound on the feet, counters well, has good, boom, straight down the pipe like striking. There's a good argument that with Makhachev's grappling ability and what he did to Oliveira and, just how, if you look at the 155-pound division, I always feel this way. It seems to be like the perfect. It's so deep, I think, because it seems to be the perfect like size and weight for fighting, weirdly, right? As you get smaller, things get more and more technical, but 155 kind of gives you this leeway for like seeing real like dominance in the grappling department on display, but you also get a lot of power in the weight classes, right? But not so much like one punch KO power that it's not like, they have to still string combinations together, so you do still see like very skillful striking. It's not like a heavyweight when you can just tee off, or like 185. Sometimes you get guys with freak power, right? Like 155, that freak power, it's there. People have it, but it's a little bit more rare, and it still requires a little bit higher of like a skill. That's why it's like 155 is the like, in my opinion. Like I said, it's like the perfect build for fighting. 155 to 170, I think, really. And then, 145, it's just like 155 seems to be that fucking weight. I don't know why. It seems to produce the most talented fighters, in my opinion. Eye test just watching things, right? But anyway, and then you got Volkanovski, who's I wouldn't say a huge 145er. Like, I think he looked a little small in there against Islam. You know what I mean? But he is well filled out for 155, and like, he's just a smaller guy in general. But he's one of the most well-rounded mixed martial artists ever. And if you look at what he did to Max Holloway, man, Volk's probably he's probably the greatest featherweight ever. He's probably the greatest representation of skill we've ever seen in the UFC octagon in the featherweight division. That's what I believe. Even if you don't think he's the greatest, like, I don't want to shit on what Jose Aldo did throughout his career or what Holloway did, but if you look at a representation of skill, I think that Volkanovski is the best featherweight ever. And obviously, he's going to take on Yair Rodriguez next. Let's talk about what's next for Islam real quick, and then we'll move on. We'll segue into Yair, right? So, for Islam, I think that he has to go and fight, like, man, what do you do? Because the 155-pound division is interesting right now because they just booked a fight with Beneil Dariush and Charles Oliveira. But, man, if you're Beneil, you got to be watching that fight and going, damn, there's a pathway to victory for me here. Like, Beneil is a very talented grappler. He's a bigger guy than Volkanovski. He's one of the dark horses in the division that people are kind of like, man, he's not getting his fair due, and I would have to agree, right? He is I slept on him in his most recent outing against Gamrot. I really thought Gamrot was going to win that fight, and man, Beneil just fucking looked incredible. He's on like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fight win streak right now in the UFC after his loss to Alexander Hernandez. And Alexander Hernandez, didn't he fake glove touch? That was fucked, right? Like, it's a fight, it happens, but that was fucked. But I mean, man, he's just so talented, and he's, after seeing that fight with Volkanovski, you got to be thinking, like, I am at least, and I think a lot of hardcore fans are looking at this and thinking, is Beneil Dariush the next logical challenger in the lightweight division? But now he's tied up with Oliveira, right? Because he probably took that fight thinking, this is what's going to advance me. And it probably still is. Beneil doesn't talk enough. He probably still does need a signature win over Charles before he fights for the title. But yeah, there's Dustin Poirier. You know, maybe Poirier could draw some inspiration from that fight and the things that Volkanovski was able to do. You know, Poirier's a black belt, man. He can grapple, and Islam is still a different fighter than Khabib. And the thing about Islam, too, is Islam is still green in his championship tenure, right? In terms of how long he's been the champ. This was his first title defense, right? I mean, and that's what I mean. I don't want to get so caught up in talking about how good Volkanovski is and not give credit where it's due to Islam, because what Islam pulled off was impressive, and you got to see a lot of talent on display from him. And, you know, he won the fight, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people's opinion he won, but it was a good-ass fight. Anyway, I think Beneil Dariush would be a great matchup, but he's tied up with Oliveira. You got Gaethje fighting Rafael Fiziev in London. By the way, my wife and I are going to that. We just got tickets. I'm fucking pumped. We leave on like the 14th of March, I think, and we're going to go to... We got decent seats and shit. I'm fucking excited, but it'll be sweet. But you got Fiziev and Gaethje who are fighting, right? That's a big fight. But it's like Poirier is there. Who else is there, right? There's nobody else for Islam at this point. And it makes you wonder, like, I know Yair is waiting down at 145, but is the immediate rematch the best fight? I mean, do you make that fight right now? I don't fucking know. I don't know. Like, I know Volkanovski should... The best thing to do for the division is to let... Here's what I think you do if you're Volkanovski. I know that you want the like featherweight title and you want to keep it or whatever. If you want to go back and defend it, I'm cool with that. Like, if you want to keep the division running, that's 100%, that's important. But you could also just relinquish the belt and challenge for the lightweight title again. I think a matchup against Volkanovski, again, it's just nothing against Poirier. But the fact that he lost to Khabib, right, is going to hurt him. And like the fact that he lost to Charles is going to hurt him in terms of like matchmaker's eyes. And Volkanovski just had a really close fight against Islam. And it makes you wonder if now that he's fought him, can he beat him again? So is there potential for an immediate rematch between Islam Makhachev and Volkanovski? I think so, but I think that Volkanovski would have to relinquish the belt. And then Yair would probably fight the next contender coming up for, you know, maybe the winner of Max Holloway and Arnold Allen for the title. I don't know. But if Volkanovski wants the rematch, I think you have to relinquish to let 145 move along. But if Volkanovski, now we can flip back the other way. If Volkanovski wants to defend the 145-pound title and retain it and everything, he has to go through Yair Rodriguez. And man, how fucking good did Yair Rodriguez look against Josh Emmett? There was really only one moment where he made a mistake, right? And he got hit with a big right hand as he was like coming in a little bit recklessly. And then from there, he ended up getting like, I don't know what happened in the exchange. I can't remember. I just remember Yair like on his back and Josh like kind of hopped on top of him. I don't think it was a takedown. I think it was like, I don't know if Yair fell or if Josh caught him with something, but either way, Josh ends up on top for the end of the first round. But throughout like the entire fight, it just felt like Josh Emmett didn't really have anything to offer Rodriguez. It felt like Yair was always, man, those fucking kicks that he throws are nasty. He throws them so fast and he generates so much leverage with them. When he hit Josh Emmett right here across the ribs, I fucking cringed so hard. I mean, those are like a fucking pap. I don't know. He throws that thing like a fucking baseball bat, like coming at your ribs. It's insane. It's insane how fast his kicks are. And he's also so creative. He has a great switch kick, and he'll get you from different angles. And Bisping does a great job of mentioning this. I thought he chains different techniques that you don't see often together. So it's not just like you're seeing one attack coming from a different angle. You're seeing multiple coming from angles that you're not probably getting looks at in the gym, and it's very confusing and overwhelming, and it's happening very quickly. And he's a tall guy, so he's hitting you from far away where you can't reach him. Yair Rodriguez is a fucking problem, man. And Volkanovski moving down to fight him, this is a whole new stylistic matchup for Volkanovski. I think that Volkanovski is going to be the favorite in that fight. I still think that Volkanovski has all the skills to pull it off, but Yair Rodriguez is a bad motherfucker, man. And again, he made 2 mistakes in the fight. He got caught with that right hand in the first round that kind of hurt him, right, and led to Josh being on top. But even when Josh got on top in that first round, Yair was extending his whole body out and boom, bringing elbows down, landing him on the head of Josh Emmett. I mean, violent elbows. And again, everything that Yair lands has so much power because he's one of those guys who's long, but he knows how to use his body and generate a ton of leverage. A lot of guys don't who are that long. You see that they don't fully know how to use their body to generate it. Yair does. And man, when he fucking cracks, he cracks. And when he's hitting you with those elbows, he's fully extending him, and he's long, right? He's got this long frame, and then he brings all of it down. And it's ooh, damn, those are nasty elbows. He's violent, man. And again, once it got to the ground, you felt like Josh didn't really have anything to offer Yair there either. So the second round comes around. Yair's just kicking the fuck out of him, beating him upright, hits him with that huge knee, and he falls down, and that's the second mistake. But he had Emett hurt, man. And when Emett got on top, again, you immediately saw that Yair started training together arm bars, locked up the triangle. Again, I'll do a breakdown on this fight too, I think. But trained together arm bars, locked up the triangle, and got Emett out of there. And man, Yair Rodriguez is a fucking problem. He's so talented. But you do see sometimes that you can kind of put it on him a little bit, right? Even Ortega had some success up against the cage in the clinch before the fight ended the way it did, right? But you got to think that Volkanovski is going to be able to push him backwards a little bit more. And you can't let him start getting off though, because when he does, man, it's a lot to deal with. But even in this fight against Emett, you got to see that he made mistakes that could cost you. They could cost you a lot in a championship fight against a guy as talented and as skilled as Volkanovski. So I do think that Yair has to tighten some things up in order to beat Volkanovski, and I think you'll probably see Volkanovski be the favorite if that's the fight that happens. Again, if Volkanovski relinquishes the belt and decides he wants to chase 155, I think the fight could get made. I think the fans would be happy with it. Why not? But I think you got to let 145 move along. Let's move on. Let's just keep moving down the card in this order. Jack Della Madellena versus Randy Brown. This fight was a really good look at how fucking good Jack Madellena is. I mean, his boxing is so smooth, and whether they game planned this or whether he figured it out in the fight, it's still impressive, right? I talked about this when we were breaking down the fight in my last podcast. When you're fighting a taller guy, in the UFC in particular, your best chance at victory, everybody says you have to get inside, and it's true. But really, your best chance at victory is, and you hear that get inside thing, I think, because of boxing. Everybody says that in boxing. When you're fighting the taller guy, you got to find your way inside. True. That if you want to go out and box the guy, you do have to do that, right? But if you're fighting a taller guy in MMA, a better path to victory is to push him up against the cage. Because even in boxing, if you push a tall guy up against the ropes, watch Muhammad Ali in that famous clip, how he's leaning out over the turnbuckle, right? You can still move your upper body out and away this way, right? And roll. When you get into the UFC and you have a cage around you, right? When you push a guy up against the cage, you take away a huge escape route for his head. You really limit his head movement, and it makes them, if the cage is behind me, I can only go this way, or just straight out, right? Those are my only options. So this is the arc that my head can travel in. Straight out, if I move straight out, or down, right? If my feet stay stationary. If I start moving my feet, I can get out this way, even with my head. But I can never lean back like this, right? I can never lean away. And that creates a lot of problems, right? And that's why you hear get inside, true. But you see a lot of knockouts and you see a lot of very accurate power punches up against the cage because you've eliminated an escape route. The true path to victory for a smaller guy in fights like this is to move their opponent against the cage. And you saw Madellena do that. And again, whether through game plan or whether through fight instinct and IQ when he got in there, it worked. And again, it's because you start cutting off their exits, right? And now when you bring that right hand, as long as you get out in front of Randy Brown, right? As long as you get that right hand out in front of him and beat his exit, he's moving this way and your fist is coming this way and boom, it collides. And it's a perfect fucking recipe for knockouts. Granted, Madellena finished him, right, with a submission. He got on top of him and choked him out after he hurt him. But the way Randy Brown fell is the way a lot of guys fall when they get knocked the fuck out. He got hit with a really clean shot and he's lucky he didn't get knocked unconscious, to be honest. That's how you got to fight a taller guy. You have to pin them back against the cage, keep their foot behind the black line, and it creates openings for you, right? You have to use good footwork and pressure. You can't let them control space, right? Because it's hard to get inside. But in MMA, you have a pathway to start getting inside and landing your power shots with much more frequency and creating opportunities for a knockout, right? So it's like Jack Madellena exemplified that. And how fucking good is this kid? I thought Randy Brown was going to be going to give him some problems, and he kind of did early on. He was doing a good job holding the range, but man, it just feels like Madellena is on another fucking level. To do that to Randy Brown is super impressive. Super impressive. Madellena's got some big things coming up in his future, but crazy fight. Crazy performance from Madellena. I mean, again, just did all the right things. Did the things that you have to do to beat the taller guy, right? And I don't know, man. I don't know what to think for him. He's got really good boxing. His hands are super smooth. I don't want to jump the gun and start saying he's championship caliber, but man, the kid's fucking good. Kid's fucking really good, and he has power in his hands. You don't do that to Randy Brown without being good. And he was a huge favorite. After I watched the fights, I thought he'd be a minus 150, minus 175, and he was a minus 330, and we got to see why. So fucking huge performance from Jack Della Madellena. Super impressive. Moving down the list, again, we got Justin Tafa versus Parker Porter. And guys, again, I hate to be this person. I like watching knockouts as much as the next guy in the heavyweight division, but there are just some fights that just don't get me going. I'm just being honest. And watching Parker Porter compete in the UFC heavyweight division, it doesn't do nothing for me. Right. And I talked about this, and don't get me wrong, Justin Tafa's a bigger guy, but for whatever reason, if you've got that Mark Hunt build and you're from that New Zealand, Australia, that whole region over there, right? If you're from there, I don't know why, but you have a crazy chin and you have a crazy knockout power. You can hang around in the heavyweight division a little bit. Look at Mark Hunt, right? That's what I mean. But if you're Parker Porter, there is just so much excess on him. And I'm not, again, I hate to be this person who's being critical, but what are you fighting for? You're in the UFC. Are you fighting to be the best? Because if so, it's not going to happen in the heavyweight division, right? I mean, think about the gap between Justin Tafa and a Francis Ngannou. How are you going to close that? How are you going to close that? You know what I mean? You're not in the right division. He's a talented martial artist, but you can't. How can you look at somebody like Cyril Gane and then yourself and think I might be able to hang around with that? The games, maybe back in the day, but I feel like the games move past that. And I feel like if he wants to be a very competitive, you got to have your body in you're talking about athletes now that have their body in tip-top shape, and they have incredible knockout power when you start moving into the heavyweight division. That combination is not going to be, it's never going to generate favorable matchups for you throughout your career in the UFC. You got to be willing to lose the weight, or you got to do something different. You know what I mean? I just think it's going to be very hard for somebody with his body type to contend in the UFC heavyweight division in today's day and age. Just fucking, again, I feel like I'm tearing this guy apart, but I really think he's good. I just think heavyweight's a tough fucking go, man. I think you got to come down in size if you want to be a real contender, and start to see success. But anyway, I digress. Moving on. Porter moved in a little bit recklessly, and again, that one-punch kind of knockout power that you see from guys like Tafa. Caught him with that left cross, right uppercut, and got the job done. Let's move on to the last fight on the main card, and then we'll kind of wrap things up here. And I want to I'll start working on the breakdowns and shit as soon as I wrap this up. But the first fight on the main card was a fucking banger. I mean, Jimmy Crute can eat some fucking shots. And I know that's not exactly the compliment that you want to receive as a fighter, but holy fuck, he can take a hit. I mean, his chin is incredible. He got hit with so many bombs from Alonzo Menafield that I can't believe he didn't get knocked the fuck out. I seriously cannot believe he did not get flatlined. His face was so black and bruised after, but also this kept surprising me about it was very clear that when Jimmy Crute got into top position, he had a big advantage in the grappling department. And also, when he was level changing, he was getting to the hips of Alonzo Menafield. I didn't quite understand Jimmy Crute's willingness to just keep walking into the line of fire. He just kept getting hit with shots continually. I don't know if he was just in a daze and on autopilot and zombie mode, and his autopilot didn't revert to wrestling. But if he would have taken some shots and level changed, I think he could have won this fight, right? I mean, I don't know. It just felt like he was too willing to wade into that fire, and Menafield just kept cracking him. And if you're Menafield, you got to be thinking, what the fuck does it take to get this guy out of here? And if you're Menafield, you got to be upset about that fence grab and the point deduction, because you probably otherwise would have won this fight. I thought Menafield did a good job of he also fought behind his lead hand much better in this fight, and that really impacted Crute, and it set up his power shots. Again, the story of this fight is kind of how much fucking punishment Crute was able to endure, But I thought that there were moments where he should have taken the fight to the ground and taken the obvious route to success, and it was like he just wanted to keep getting hit, I guess. I don't know. It was like he wasn't finding much success on the feet. Maybe every once in a while he'd land a little something, but for the most part, it was just Menafield teeing the fuck off on his face. And it's like, man, do something else. Go to the clinch, level change, mix things up. And he just was continually, like I said, wading into that fire. I couldn't believe it. It was hard to watch at times, but tough as nails, man. I mean, like I said, if Menafield can't get you out of there too, a guy with that kind of power, you're fucking tough. So crazy, but I don't know. That's pretty much it, guys. Like I said, a lot going on with that main event, and it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out from here. I think if Volkanovski, like I said, I think if he wants to challenge for that 155-pound title again, the right thing to do would be to relinquish the 145 belt and let the division move along while he's challenging at 155, right? Maybe go back down and fight again for it, take it back, become dual champ that way. But if you want the 155 belt from Makhachev, it's also if you're Volkanovski, listen, Yair is not a guaranteed win. And your opportunity, you just felt Makhachev and you have an opportunity to fight him immediately. I'd be thinking about setting the 140, and once you've kind of tasted, once you've gotten that close to tasting the 155-pound gold, I bet you won it. I bet it's just forbidden fruit. I almost guarantee you that Volkanovski is going to think about relinquishing if he has to and challenging for 155. I just feel like 155 is going to feel more enticing to him now. He's going to feel like maybe he can bulk up a little bit more, maybe get a little bit more prepared for it. He's already felt Islam Makhachev, and he's seen what Islam's done to other lightweights. I'm telling you, it would be going through my head. If I had just gone through, but I'm not Volkanovski, right? But I think that if I had just gone through what Volkanovski just went through, I'd be thinking, I kind of want that 155-pound belt. Fuck 145. You know what I mean? You already kind of wiped 145. Let Yair go and take on all these newcomers. But we'll see. It'd be interesting to see if it shakes out like that. But anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap this one up. I want to get these breakdowns before the Super Bowl today, right? I got to make some food and shit. I'm fucking, like I said, unfortunately on call. I haven't gotten called while I've been making these videos, luckily, right? I did get called last night. But anyway, rambling. But anyway, we're going to hop off here. I'm going to make this breakdown video for Yair Rodriguez hitting the triangle over Emett. I'm going to make the one for Makhachev and Volkanovski. There will probably be a heavy emphasis on Volkanovski's takedown defense And yeah, guys, that's it. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Much love, and I will catch you guys later. Bye-bye.